What is up, guys? It is Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my week 13 quarterback start sits. So going through every single matchup, talking about every fantasy relevant quarterback or every starting quarterback, listing them as either a start, sit, or a fringe option. As always, if you have any questions, you can drop them down below. I'll get back to every single person. But let's just jump right into the Thursday night matchup. We have the Bills taking on the Patriots. On the Bills side, obviously you're going to be firing up Josh Allen as one of the top fantasy football quarterbacks. Now for the Patriots, we do have Mac Jones coming off of a really strong performance on Thanksgiving. He's still not someone I'm going to be starting, against a tough Bills defense. Mac Jones just hasn't been a super consistent option for fantasy, so he will be a sit. Then moving over to Sunday, we have the Steelers taking on the Falcons. Kenny Pickett, really just not fantasy relevant in one quarterback leagues at this point. On the other side, I could see the argument for Marcus Mariota being a fringe option. Honestly, just at this point in the season, the quarterback position is very, very strong. We've got Watson coming back. We only have two teams on bye. So for me, Mariota is going to be a sit. If you want to argue him as like a back-end fringe option, like a mid-tier QB2, I wouldn't push back too hard, but I would hope you have, someone better in your lineup. Then we have the Broncos taking on the Ravens. A pretty clear start and a pretty clear sit here. Obviously, we're going to be sitting Russell Wilson. Broncos offense just continues to look horrible. And then for the Ravens, fire up Lamar Jackson as a start. He honestly should have had a much bigger day than he did last Sunday. Had a few touchdown passes dropped. Obviously, that's going to happen when you don't have great weapons around you, aside from Mark Andrews, but we're obviously still going to be starting Lamar Jackson moving forward. In a divisional matchup between the Packers and the Bears, for the Packers here, we have Aaron Rodgers, and I have him as a fringe option. I think in terms of matchups, this is really solid against the Bears. Over the last 5 weeks, these are the point totals that the Bears have allowed: 49, 35, 31, 27, and 31. So even though the Packers offense hasn't exactly been firing on all cylinders throughout the entire season, I think this is a good spot for them. The problem here with Rodgers is the health concerns. He's dealing with, I believe he said, a fractured thumb, and he also has the rib injury that forced him out of the Sunday night game against the Eagles. So the injuries are there. You do have Christian Watson emerging. I think he's a mid to high end QB2 this week, so not someone who I feel like needs to be in your starting lineup, but if you have him in there, I think he's totally suitable. Now on the other side with the Bears, Justin Fields may be able to make his return this week. The way that I was always kind of looking at it is that they had 2 weeks, then they have the week 14 bye, so I wouldn't be shocked if they sit him out this week, let him head into the bye, and then bring him back in week 15 and on. But if he does play, I think he's a very strong start. He showcased an insane ceiling. And then obviously if he's out, Trevor Siemian, not even, looking at him fantasy-wise. In the next game, we have the Jaguars taking on the Lions. And for Trevor Lawrence, he's basically all season long been a very steady fantasy asset, constantly, in this fringe range, maybe gearing up to be a starting option in, games with strong matchups. He's coming off his second best fantasy performance of the season, pass for 321 yards, pass for 3 touchdowns, and then you look at this matchup here against the Lions. They've allowed the most fantasy points per game to the quarterbacks, so just a lot of positive things here for T-Law, and I do think he is a quarterback one this week, a top 12 guy. On the other side with the Lions, I have Jared Goff as a fringe option. He will likely be getting Jamison Williams in the lineup. I think that's going to help him long term. This is also a pretty plus matchup here against the Jaguars, who haven't exactly been locked down to the quarterback position. Now, in probably one of the most highly anticipated games, not necessarily for competitiveness, but the Deshaun Watson storyline, we have the Browns taking on the Texans. And I have Deshaun Watson listed as a start. This is his first game back from the suspension. And I think there are probably some people out there who aren't going to want to start him right away. And I don't necessarily blame you. We don't know exactly what we're going to be getting out of Deshaun Watson. He hasn't played in like a year and a half, so he could be rusty. I do think this is a pretty decent matchup to kind of ease your way back in going up against the Texans. But just looking at Deshaun Watson as a football player and a fantasy football asset, in his 4 seasons, he has been just a very strong and steady fantasy quarterback option. So his points per game in his first 4 seasons, 24.1, 20.7, 21.3, and 23.1. So 4 straight years above that 20 number. I have him as a start. Probably more of a back-end QB1 in his first game back, but he definitely could work his way up to being a mid to high-end QB1 if he is the same guy that we saw with the Texans. And then on the other side with the Texans, whether it's Davis Mills or Kyle Allen, just absolutely avoiding this quarterback room for fantasy. Then we have the Jets taking on the Vikings. And I have Mike White here as a sit. I feel like some people may not love that. This is a decent matchup here against the Vikings, and he's obviously coming off of that huge game against the Bears. For me, I don't want to overreact for one big game. I definitely think, things are looking up for these Jets weapons. I love it for Garrett Wilson, like it for Tyler Conklin. I just don't want to, go all in on the Mike White bandwagon. If you want to say he's a fringe option, I'm not going to push back too hard. I'm not going to make that call right now. If he gives you a solid game against the Vikings, then we'll definitely, consider him as a fringe option moving forward. And then on the other side with the Vikings, Kirk Cousins, this is basically where he's lived all season long, in the fringe. Tough defensive matchup against the Jets, but I still think, he's a probably high-end to mid-tier QB2. In the Commanders-Giants matchup, I have Taylor Heineke here as a sit. He's winning games for the Commanders, but in terms of fantasy points at the quarterback position, not exactly, lighten up the score sheet. For the Giants, I have Daniel Jones as a fringe option. He just continues to produce with things just falling apart around him. Injuries to the offensive line, injuries to a wide receiver core that was already pretty bad heading into the season. Maybe he'll get a boost with OBJ over the next few weeks, but right now I do think he's probably a high-end QB2 moving forward. Honestly, just pretty impressive with what he's been able to do so far with the lack of just, talent around him on the offensive side. In the Titans-Eagles matchup, a pretty clear start and a pretty clear sit. Obviously, we're going to be sitting Ryan Tannehill. Hopefully, he continues to get Treylon Burks the ball. But, for fantasy-wise, not interested in starting Tannehill. And then for the Eagles, obviously, we're going to be firing up Jalen Hurts as a very strong play. In the Seahawks Rams divisional matchup, I have Geno Smith as a start. I think he's established himself as a very kind of safe, consistent back-end QB1, somewhere in that QB10 to QB12 range. And then for the Rams, whether they stick with Bryce Perkins or Matthew Stafford comes back from the concussion, we're going to be sitting these guys regardless. This team is really in shambles. They are just falling apart there in Los Angeles, coming off that Super Bowl win. Just, a crazy fall off. Now, in probably one of the top two games of the week, the Dolphins taking on the 49ers. I think both of these quarterbacks are strong starts. Tua has been super impressive for fantasy. This is a tough matchup against the 49ers, but with Tyreek Hill, with Jalen Waddle, I think he's set up pretty well to have a decent game, even in a rough matchup. For the 49ers with Jimmy Garoppolo, he's coming off of a down game in Week 12, but this is a really strong matchup here against the Dolphins, who have allowed the third most points per game to fantasy quarterbacks. I think he's a strong back-end QB1 play. Always got to just point out the fact that he has the most talented weapons in the NFL. Debo, Brandon Ayuk, Kittle, Christian McCaffrey. Jimmy's going to be fine, and I think he's a strong play in a great matchup here against the Dolphins defense. And then I said that last matchup was probably one of the top two, most highly anticipated games. The Chiefs-Bengals has got to be right up there also. And don't need to spend a ton of time here. Both these quarterbacks locked in starts. Patrick Mahomes, one of the best fantasy quarterbacks of the season. And then for the Bengals, Joe Burrow likely getting Jamar Chase back, was still solid with Chase out. Obviously, we're firing up both those dudes as starts. In the Chargers-Raiders matchup, Justin Herbert, definitely going to be a start moving forward, has looked really solid since getting his weapons back. And then for the Raiders, I have Derek Carr here as a fringe option. And when it kind of looked like Derek Carr was just going to fade away into a really rough season, when we saw Waller go on IR, Hunter Renfrow go on IR, he's just pulled off a very impressive last four games, 18.4, 17.9, 20.3, 20.8 fantasy points over that stretch. So I think he'll probably be a high-end QB2 play. Pretty decent matchup here against the Chargers. So probably like I said, just outside the top 12, but right up there, and is someone who could definitely be, appearing in your lineups. On Sunday Night Football, we have the Colts taking on the Cowboys. A clear sit and a clear start. Sitting Matty Ice, starting Dak Prescott. And then the final game of the week, Monday Night Football, Saints Buccaneers. If history is going to tell us anything here, it's probably going to be a pretty gross game to watch. Saints, pretty much have the cheat code, I guess, on stopping this Bucs offense. Saints have looked pretty brutal on offense recently, so sitting Andy Dalton. Hope they go with Jameis. Would still be sitting them, but I would like to see it for fantasy. And then for the Buccaneers, Tom Brady at this point is probably like a low-end fringe option. Not even his fault. There's just no explosion on this offense. Bulls, Leftwich. I feel like I've talked about it a million times. You guys are probably sick of hearing me just crap on those guys, but it's just not working out. He's a back-end fringe play unless something can, switch up here moving forward. But that is going to wrap it up for every single Week 13 quarterback matchup. If you guys haven't seen the running backs and wide receivers, those were posted yesterday. Tight ends will be posted today also, so go check those out. Any questions, drop them down below. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. You guys know the drill. Thank you for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.